Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Plymouth United Church of Christ, located in the heart of Detroit, the very tip-top of the medical center area of Detroit. And we're so glad that you are worshiping with us today. As crazy as it might seem, I believe that your best days and my best days are actually ahead of us. Let me say that again. As crazy as it may seem, I believe that your best days are ahead of you. I read this week about a man named Dale Sanders who walked the Grand Canyon from rim to rim to rim at 85 years of age. When he was 80, Dale Sanders canoed the entire length of the Mississippi River and all the way down from North America down to the Gulf of Mexico. Also at 80 years of age, Dale Sanders walked the Appalachian Trail from Key West to the southern end of the Georgia border. And what this shows us is that your best days are ahead of you. I don't think anybody ever heard of Dale Sanders before he turned 80 years of age. And just as Mr. Sanders is achieving great things in his old age, you and I can achieve something new, not just in our old age, but every day of life. All last week, I've been reading, writing, and recording blogs and podcasts about the ascension of King Solomon following his father, David. And one of the things that jumped out to me was that at every stage, every age of the life of King Solomon, God gave him something better. God gave him something more. Let me read to you from 1 Kings chapter 10. Listen to what God tells Solomon at the beginning of his kingdom. This is after Solomon has built a temple to the Lord. It reads, starting in verse 4, "As for you, if you will walk before me as David your father walked with integrity of heart and uprightness, doing according to all that I have commanded you, and keeping my statutes and my ordinances, that I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised your father David, saying, there shall not fail you a successor on the throne of Israel." And as I think about the accession of Solomon to the kingdom, following his father David, several things come out to me. One, that every age and stage of the life of Solomon, God blessed him. And every day was a better and a bigger day than the day before. Think about the life of Solomon. 700 wives, 300 concubines. And many of those wives were the daughters of his potential adversaries, the countries that ringed Israel, from Lebanon to Egypt. And he married the daughters of the kings. And think about the wisdom of this. If you marry the daughters of your potential adversaries, who wants to fight their son-in-law? And so Solomon had uninterrupted peace for 40 years. This is unheard of, even today in the life of Israel. 40 years of uninterrupted wealth, 40 years of uninterrupted prosperity, 40 years of an expanded landmass larger than present-day Israel. Some of the Arab people that I talked to visiting Israel were angry even today because they say when they look at the shekel and look at the monetary denominations in Israel, there's a map on one of them of the borders of Israel, and the map of the borders of Israel go back to the time of Solomon, not today. And they get angry about that. And but this reflects on the magnitude, the reach, the expanse of King Solomon. And the more I read, reflected, and wrote about Solomon, the more I was reminded that the same can be offered to you and me. Every day should be a better day. And no matter how old you are, every day, every age, every stage of life ought to offer something new and wonderful. Our best days are ahead of us. And I know somebody looking at this right now is probably saying, Nick Hood, you have lost your mind. What do you mean your best days are ahead of us? But I go back to the 10th chapter of 1 Kings. After 7 years of construction of the temple, the house of the Lord, Solomon spent another 13 years building his personal palace. And one of the things I was reminded of is that the temple and the palace are both made of the cedars and the cypress woods from Lebanon. Solomon entered into a pact with King Hiram of Lebanon, Tyre. And Hiram provided not just the wood, but he provided the workers. He provided the workmanship, and then he trained the Israelite woodworkers into the manner in which the people in Lebanon were skilled woodworkers. And together they built the house of the Lord. But it's fascinating. There's a theological statement in the building of the house of the Lord. The house of the Lord that Solomon built was established with a wood foundation framed with stone, or stone framed with wood. And then on top of that, it's overlaid with gold. Everything was in the temple was overlaid with gold. But when you get to the house of Solomon, which took 13 more years to build, it too had a stone outside, wooden frames, but it also had bronze. It didn't have gold. The overlay in Solomon's house was bronze. And I believe that Solomon may have been making a theological statement, that because he surely had enough gold to cover the floors and the walls in gold, but he covered it in bronze. And I think that was a little testimony on his part to say that my house may be great, but it's not as great as the house of the Lord. Solomon is promised by God that he would be blessed all the days of his life, with one caveat. And in the reading, what God tells him is the continued blessings required continued faith and devotion. Listen to what he says here in verse 5. Then I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised your father David, saying, there shall not fail you a successor on the throne of Israel. And then he goes on to say, but if your children stray from the way, then the succession will end. And there's a lesson in this, and the lesson is that for you and me, if we want to look to better days ahead, you and I have to maintain faith and integrity in God. So let's come back to our theme, your best days are in front of you. How can this be when every day of life we get a little older? Every morning when I wake up, now I'm saying it and I forgot to do it before coming here today, but I used to brag in church that I was a 60-year-old unmedicated black man. But I can no longer say that, because every day of life, when I wake up, I'm supposed to take 1 drop of eye drops because I have pre-glaucoma. And the ophthalmologist, Dennis Woods, who may be watching this, Dr. Woods, told me, he said, you know, your mother had glaucoma. She had glaucoma, or in the early stages of glaucoma. And she died younger than I am today. And so part of my regimen is every day I get on the floor in my living room. I know somebody may ask, why, Reverend, do you get on the floor in your living room? Why don't you just sit in a chair? Why don't you get in your bed and do it? But I don't know. I leave the eye drops in the refrigerator. That's what the instructions say. Keep refrigerated. I go out of the icebox into the living room. I get on the floor. I put my feet up on a, I don't know what you call it, thing in the middle of the floor, and I hold my head back and I let one drop come into each eye. And I never had to do that before, and that's all part of just getting older. But I'm going to tell you something. That to me, that's a small price. Take one eye drop a day. The ophthalmologist, Dr. Woods is now retired. Now I use a guy named Murphy, who's younger. And he tells me, he said, Reverend, don't worry about it. You have pre-glaucoma. He said, you're a long way off from this. He said, but if you take that one drop a day, that will lubricate your eyes, and it will help keep your eyes intact. And so I think about that. My medical doctor, Eric Ayers, when I turned 50, he told me, he said, take a multivitamin every day. And once I started taking a multivitamin, I realized that I had much more energy. And there's a lesson in that. I told him, I said, man, I wish I had known about this when I was into politics, because I could have used something like this. But you learn something at every age and every stage of life. But for me, every day has proved to be a better day. Now, does this mean that my life is messed up? No, far be it. Far be from it. I am not messed up, just older. And in simple terms, what I've learned is just try to make the most of every day of life. Look for something that is new and exciting every day of life. Try to learn something new every day. During this pandemic, I've been experimenting with cooking. It's really not safe to, go out into the confined space of the restaurants. Many of us are getting takeout food from the restaurant to lessen the likelihood that you might contract the coronavirus. And so what I've been doing is trying to learn how to cook. And my latest foray into cooking this past week was learning how to cook garbanzo beans. And you may say, Reverend, where in the world is that coming from? But for me, again, I've got more time in the pandemic. And looking at recipes on my telephone, I learned about the garbanzo bean, how some vegans use that as a substitute for meat. If you mash it and you season it. And so I've been working with garbanzo beans. Later on today, I'm going to try to make navrataran korma, or a vegetable korma, which is a korma, which is an Indian dish. And you may say, where in the world is that coming from? Well, it's simply because I like Indian food. And matter of fact, with Dr. Orande and attorney Rita White, they've gotten together with me and my wife, and we try to, this is before the pandemic, and trying out different restaurants, we kind of settled on Indian food. It seemed like the kind of food that nobody in our group of four had an objection to. And so the point that I'm making is that, you can learn something at every age, every stage of life. A year ago, Denise and I went to my 50th high school reunion. And, you think about that. People who graduated from high school in 1969. And even though several of the people who attended were on oxygen, canes, and walkers, everybody was glad to be there. Lamar and Ibrahim, can you imagine your 50th class reunion? You guys are young and healthy right now, but imagine and ask yourself now, who in my group will be on a cane, a walker, and on oxygen? But I think the people in my group were so glad just to be alive that they didn't care about the cane, the walker. They didn't care about the oxygen. They were just there. And we all had a great time. And the point that I'm making is every day of life can be a good day. It may not be what you thought it would be, but I tell you, if you are alive, it will be a good day. And so I want to share with you some of my thoughts on how each day, even in your old age, can be a better day. Number one, rejoice in your past. Celebrate the past, but don't get stuck in the past. Always have something to look forward to. That's why I think those people at my class reunion with the oxygen, the canes, and the walkers, They were not stuck in the past. They weren't even stuck in the future. They were just glad to be there. But rejoice in your past. Celebrate your past. I'm like Mom's Mabley. There's no part of the good old days that I want to go back to. And, and that doesn't mean that I didn't like the good old days, but I don't want to do at 68 what I was doing at 28. I don't want to do what I was doing at 18. But when I was 18, I celebrated what I was doing. The point that I'm making is celebrate where you are in life and then move on to whatever is next in life. And for me, every new day is a new opportunity for excitement, a new opportunity for anticipation, a new opportunity for a sense of wonder. And you need to know when to move on, which means do not dwell on the past. The things I was doing at 14, by the time I turned 15, were the past. At 14, I thought I was going to be a football player. Marcus, where's Marcus? But at 15, I went to Cass, and Harold Arnoldi, the head of the music department, said, "Young man, don't you know your mouth is precious to me? I can't afford for anybody to hit you in your mouth." He said, "You will choose today what you will play, but it will not be both." I was playing trombone back then. And I made the shift very easily. And Mike, you guys on the Cass football team weren't saying much back then. And so I never missed a beat thinking about football because now I was playing the trombone. And the point that I'm making is at every age and stage of my life, what I've tried to do was to do what was relevant at that stage. And sometimes it was only the difference of 1 year. But I knew when I moved on to the next stage that there was no way I could go backwards. You need to know when to move on. We also need to know how to maintain and hold on to the values and principles that got us to where we are. Now, I would also say these are the positive values and principles. Some of us get hung up in some negativity, and as we age in life, we just keep the negative stuff with us. We have an apartment building the church built behind the church. And when we first opened up, we're talking about 40 years ago, one of the residents came to me and was a church member and was complaining about some of her fellow residents. And I said, I can't believe that old people get involved in the kind of devilment that you're talking about. She said, "Reverend, if a person was a rascal when he was young, he's a rascal when he's old." And I thought that was kind of funny, but the point that she was making was, these people were holding on to principles and values that were negative when they were young, and they're still doing that. And so one of the lessons to me in all of this is do not let the craziness of the day throw you off your path. And certainly, my friends, we are living in a time of a lot of craziness. The presidential election is so ugly and the politics is so partisan. It could make a person cynical, jaundiced, and depressed. And some people wonder, how can you say that a better day is ahead? It looks like Joe Biden is out front. Frankly, 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton looked like she was out in front. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but lost the electoral college vote. And so somebody, I'm sure, looking at this today is saying, "Reverend, how in the world can you say that a better day is ahead?" And let me tell you why I think a better day is ahead. Number one, the national polling shows that there are more people, at least from my perspective, who resonate with a progressive kind of politics. Specifically, people who resonate with a woman having the right to choose what happens to her body. And number two, the number of people, and there are more people than not in America, who have decided that they want to keep affordable care, the Affordable Care Package that President Obama put into place during his time when Joseph Biden was the vice president. And I know that there's some people who are afraid. They say, well, Biden may lose, Trump may win, and the supporters of Trump may gut the Affordable Care Act, that the new Supreme Court may be thumbs down on the Affordable Care Act. They may be thumbs down on a woman's right to choose what happens to her body. But I'm going to tell you something. The hands of the clock on the wall are ticking toward a more progressive America, a more loving, kind, and gentle America. And there's a minority out there, a Republican minority, that doesn't have the votes, but they are smart and they're very clever in what they're doing. And what it means is that if you line up on a progressive side of this scale of justice, you got to get out and vote. You got to do what it takes to do to play by the rules and win by the rules. But if you do that, I'm so glad to hear about the people who are standing in line in Georgia and other parts of the country just for the opportunity to vote. And what that tells me, my friends, is that the clock on the wall is ticking toward what's right and good and wonderful. And the horse is already out the barn. And what I mean by that is that the nation is already moving towards women's rights and affordable health care. Warren Buffett, the rich man, has some interesting ideas about what makes some people successful and other people not. I was struck to hear and to read some of his thoughts about 3 steps for becoming a successful person. He says, number 1, love what you do. Number 2, be a doer and not a thumb sucker. When he talked about a thumb sucker, I thought about myself. When I was a little boy, I used to suck my thumb. And, I was trying to remember just yesterday, what does it take to suck your thumb? You've got to put your thumb in your mouth, and you got to put your big lips on top of your thumb, and then you got to hold it down. And so I said, just for the heck of it, let me see what it takes to be a thumb sucker. And so I took my thumb, and I put it right in my mouth. Just like that. And I said, man, it's been so long since I sucked a thumb, I forgot how to do it. But by the same token, my DNA allows me to roll my tongue. How many people looking at this can roll your tongue? How many people here can twist your tongue? I don't know if that's the twisting is like the rolling. But one of the things that changed me from twisting the tongue was baseball. As a little boy, I played Little League baseball, and I would get up to the back, to the plate, hold the bat up, and I would twist my tongue. Come on, throw that ball at me. But in our Little League, there was a boy, a pitcher, who pitched on one of the teams with Bob Williams, the Maroon Sox, and Mel Jefferson. And this guy we call Big Donald. I never knew his last name, but Big Donald was a heavyweight for a little boy. And when you're a heavyweight pitcher, sometimes I think that helps to put heat on the ball. And he could throw the ball so fast, and I was terrified that he might hit me in the head one day when I was at the plate, that I slowly untwisted my tongue. I went from this to this. And I kept the tongue in my mouth. And then a little later, I met Mike Daniels, and we were playing football and smacking each other around. And then I really kept the tongue in the mouth. I said, because you have a mouth guard on, I said, it's not worth it to bite down on your tongue. And I got out of that. But I was thinking about that when I read that Warren Buffett says, if you want to be a successful person, be a doer and not a thumb sucker. To me, the thumb sucker is the person who just sits on the sidelines. The thumb sucker is the person who's procrastinating. The thumb sucker is a person who's wondering, do I move to the left? Do I move to the right? Do I invest now, or do I hold on to my money? In a pandemic, there are a lot of people who are sucking that thumb. And they're sucking that thumb because they don't know what to do. Because the old business models have been turned upside down. And at some point, my friends, we've got to stop sucking that thumb and start really deciding, I'm going to be a doer. And then the third point that Warren Buffett says is, do not judge yourself by other people's standards. Do not judge yourself by other people's standards. So let's put those three things all together. Number one, he says, love what you do. Now, some people will have to say, but Reverend, I'm digging ditches all day. I'm sweeping streets all day. I don't love what I do. I would say if you don't love what pays your bills, then figure out, well, maybe I can do something else. And if I can't do something else, then maybe I can let what I do that pays my bills help me pay the bills, so that after work I can shift gears and move on to something else. But don't be stuck in the mud. Don't be mad about what you do. Be a doer. And if you're a doer, think about what it takes to be a doer. Number one, figure out, how do I move the ball forward? If I am going to be a doer, that means, how do I take my life and make something constructive out of it? I may not like what pays my bills, but I have more hours in the day than the hours that I spend paying my bills. And so let me figure out, what can I do that's productive with my time? And then after you figure out what's productive with your time, then move on and try to do something with your time. And then that last point, do not judge yourself by other people's standards. Think of the debt people go into because they want a car that they think somebody else will be impressed with. You know, I know people, and don't get mad at me, but I know some people who spend a lot of money for a nameplate on the car. And I never really thought so much about the nameplate on the car until one day my wife told me, she said, Nick, do you realize that the BMW, the Mercedes, the Saab, all of them, at some point, they have a vehicle that looks like a sedan. And she said, when you look at the sedan and get past the nameplate, they really don't look that much different. And then with global production of cars, if you look at the insides, they're really not that different. You get to the inside of a car, it looks like the seats are pretty much manufactured by somebody. You say it's Lear. A young engineer in our church one day when I was driving a Ford Lincoln LS, that's the baby Lincoln. It wasn't much of a car, and they got rid of the Lincoln. They stopped producing it. But he leaned in to say hello one day in the parking lot, and as he looked at the air conditioning vents in my car, and he had been working in a company that was located in Sweden. He said, Dick, you know, I helped design that. I said, what? He said, I helped to design the heating and cooling unit that's in your car from Sweden. I said, isn't that something? That's amazing. Those of you who don't believe me, look at the steering wheel on your car today. Particularly if you drive a Mercedes, a Saab, a Volvo. Look at and then look at the steering wheel on my Ford Explorer. They look pretty similar to me. Look at the console in your car, the temperature controls. Look at the air conditioning controls in your car, and they look mighty similar to me. And the point that I'm making, my friends, is with the globalization of manufacturing, there are a lot of things that are very similar in a car other than the nameplate. The point that I'm making is, do not judge yourself by other people's standards. And if you decide that you want a car that's not American, that's your prerogative. Go for it. But the point that I'm making is, don't get somebody else's nameplate just because you want a different nameplate. Because what you may find is that they're really not that very different. So as crazy as it may seem, I believe that your best days and my best days are still ahead of us. When I think about this church and the challenges that we are going through, worshiping not in person, but worshiping virtually and online, who would have ever dreamed in 101 years, as long as this church has been in existence, that we would ever be a church and not have a church full of people? I'm convinced that the best days for this church are still ahead of us. Don't get me wrong. The church has achieved a tremendous amount in the last 100 years, but I do believe our best days are ahead of us. Next month, November 15th, we're going to conduct an annual church meeting. And for the first time in the history of the church, the annual meeting will be virtual. And what that means, my friends, is that we're not going to be in person, but we're going to vote online. And I have a very dedicated nominating committee that's working like you could not believe to make sure we have a complete ballot for this year. Those of you who are watching this who belong to another church, ask yourself, is my church going to have a virtual annual meeting? I was talking to Darwin Fair, our church lawyer. I said, what do you think, Darwin? Do we have to do it? He says, well, the Constitution says you shall have an annual meeting by the third Sunday in November. And I'd even talked to Dr. Davis, our church moderator. I said, before talking to the lawyer, I said, Dr. Davis, maybe we could just suspend the annual meeting and keep everybody in office. And it seemed like a good idea to me. And then I talked to the lawyer. He said, but Nick, it says the church shall have an annual meeting. He said, one, that means legally you're required to do that. It doesn't say anything about a pandemic, but he says you're required to do that. And number two, he said, think of the signal that will give to other churches in Detroit that Plymouth is having an annual meeting and in a pandemic. And he said, and I'm telling you, if you don't have an annual meeting, you will be an example for a second-rate kind of church. And so here we are. We're moving toward a virtual annual meeting. And already people are lining up to run for church office. I've never seen anything like it. And I think we may be farther along in the nominating process, Dr. Davis, than we've ever been before. And it's amazing. Why? Because I think that people understand the urgency. They understand the relevancy. And they understand love for their church. That if you're going to love your church, you got to be a part of the church. And if you're going to be a part of the church, it's not just coming to church and sitting in church, but at some point you got to stand up and say, I am going to celebrate my personal gifts and I'm going to share my gifts with the church. Why? Because people understand our best days are ahead of us. And if our best days are ahead of us, my friends, what that means is that you and I cannot be stuck in the past. We as a church, Plymouth United Church of Christ, are duking it out in the midst of a pandemic. And, next month, our trustee board, the end of the month, is going to sit down with Sonia Ponce, who's engineer, heating and cooling engineer, and she's going to explain the pros and the cons of solar energy for the church. And I'm saying, who in the world would ever think that at a time like this, we'd be talking about solar energy? We can't get human energy in the church. But we're talking about solar energy. And the point that I'm making, my friends, is that the best days are ahead. We are moving forward as a church. It's true for the church, but it's also true for you and me individually. And if you put your trust in the Lord, like what God told Solomon to do, then what you'll find is that every day will be a better day. I received a correspondence this week from another young woman in our church, Tasha Bullock. And Tasha, I hope you're looking at this today. But I was struck that Tasha sent me a website for a new startup business that she's doing. Now, she's a master of business administration. She already has a thriving and going concern in terms of food production and distribution. But she's taken it now to the next level. And Tasha has put together a company that goes back to her own personal roots, growing up on a farm with fresh vegetables. And somehow she's figured out how to distribute fresh produce directly to people online. And in a couple weeks, I'm going to start sharing her information. But I think about that. I say, here in the midst of a pandemic, we got a young woman who's talking about how am I going to bring carrots and apples and cabbage to people's houses. And there's a lesson in this. And the lesson is no matter who you are, your days are still in front of you. I want to tell you one more story. This week, I got the most fascinating email. Actually, it wasn't an email, but what it was my cousin, Ernest Battle, who's down in hot San Antonio, Texas. Ernest put out an email and he said, if you have a child in the 7th or 8th grade who's having difficulty with algebra, if you're going through Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and you don't understand it, and if you are a parent, and if you don't understand algebra, and you don't understand how to help your child, your children with their homework, he said, I want you to dial in to this Zoom call that I'm going to have on Thursday night. And he said, I will try to explain the process of algebra to you as a parent. And I was struck by this. He actually did a video. And when I looked at it, Ernest had 1,000 views. This was early in the week. By the time we got to Thursday, he was just under 5,000 views. I said, my God, Ernest has gone viral. And I called him up. I said, Ernest, do you realize you have gone viral? You've got 5,000 views. He said, Cousin Nick, he said, I don't know what to do with it. He said, I'm amazed by the response. And we started talking about it, and I said, Ernest, man, I wish I had something like this when I was in the 7th grade. I needed it not just for my parents, I needed it for me. And I told him, I said, when my boys were at the time of learning about algebra, they would come to me. I said, why don't they come to their mother? I said, they would come to me and say, Dad, I don't understand this. And because they're second generation of not understanding. I didn't mess around. I got on the phone. I called Greg Rout in New York. I called Dr. Johnson Julia Tway. My Liberian friends recognize the name, Dr. Tway, right here in Detroit. And I called my brother, Steve, on the east side of Detroit. And between those 3 guys, it was the most fascinating thing to me. I don't think any of them, maybe Dr. Tway once or twice, maybe Steve once or twice, would sit down with them and help them work out their math and work it out conceptually in a manner. There was something about Dr. Tway, Greg Rout, and Steve, how they could talk to my children about math, and somehow my kids got it. And they got it so well that by the time they went to Cass Tech, you guys may not know this, but they were number 6 and number 1 in the aptitude tests for math. And all that started by them saying, I don't understand it. But they had a lot of help, and they had help from around the country that was helping them. On the telephone, it was the most fascinating things to me to see that happen. So when I talked to my cousin Ernest about it, I said, Ernest, you know, that's what I did with my sons, and because I knew that I didn't have a clue about algebra. And he said, well, Cousin Nicky, he said, I want to tell you something. I said, what's that? He said, 3 weeks ago, I got let go from my company. They laid me off. He said, I work for, I forget the name of the company, but it's this big company that writes the mathematical questions, the algebraic formulas, and the answers to the questions for the SAT. He said, I've been doing that for 15 years. My cousin has a PhD in math. You think about that. And he said, and they let me go. And he said, and when they let me go, it dawned on me, he said, maybe the Lord is trying to tell me something. He said, maybe the Lord is saying, Ernest, this is your opportunity. And so Ernest searched on Google, and he found that he could have a Gmail account called Minister of Math. So he calls it Minister of Math. And he said, you know, I think this may just be a ministry for me. I said, I'm going to tell you something. It's not just a ministry. I said, if you figure out how to monetize this ministry, you're going to be a rich man. I said, the fact that 5,000 people dialed into you, that's a lesson. And what that lesson is that you have struck a nerve, Cousin Ernest, with a lot of people in the country. And I just applaud Ernest. I just applaud you because I believe that God is showing favor on you. And if it wasn't for you being let go from your job, you wouldn't do this. You know, you have gotten off the cliff and you are into the fight right now. And so, my friends, I leave you with this thought. Nick Hood goes to bed every night excited about tomorrow. I'm fired up about what the next day will bring. I go to bed at night and I keep thinking to myself, God, what will you have me to do tomorrow? What will you have me to do this week and next week and this month? And the more I think about it, the more I realize that God is peeling away the clouds. And all of a sudden, I feel like I can see so much better. And what I realize, my friends, is that God has promised me another day at life. And with another day of life, my friends, I feel like there's another opportunity for favor. There's another opportunity for blessing. There's another opportunity to do something. Not to sit on the sidelines sucking my thumb, but a day to do something good in the name of the Lord. And so I leave you with this blessing. Look forward to tomorrow. Don't cringe about tomorrow. Look forward to what God is offering to you. And even when something happens in your life that looks like it's your darkest day, your cloudiest day, your worst day, it really may be God's way of saying, I have something better for you. If you get laid off, don't quit. If you get fired, don't stop. If you get humbled because of your health, if you get sidelined because you can't figure out your finance, go into your prayer closet, pray to the Lord, and see how God has prepared another day, another opportunity for you. My friends, I hope I've left you with a little more optimism, a little more courage, a little more sense of what you can do in life. Hold on to this faith, hold on to this promise. And if, like Solomon, you maintain your faith in God and maintain your devotion to God, God will bless not only you, but your children and your children's children. God bless you. Amen. My friends, at this point in the service, we open the doors of the church. Maybe there's somebody here today who's trying to figure out, how can I have a better day tomorrow when I got fired today? How can I have a better day tomorrow when I can't do the work that I do so well? How can I have a better day tomorrow when I open my restaurant and even at peak, I can only make 40% of what I was making before the pandemic? And I'm here to tell you, my friends, that God has a blessing for you. And that blessing is right now. And part of the blessing is you've tuned into this church service because you see there's a blessing in this house. And it's waiting for you. Just have faith to receive it. God knows that you need it. There's a blessing in this house. Will you sing with me? There's a blessing in this house, and it's waiting for you. There's a blessing in this house, and it's waiting for you. Just have faith to receive it. God knows. God knows that you need it. There's a blessing in this house, and it's waiting for you. There's healing in this house, waiting for you. There is healing in this house, and it's waiting for you. You may have the coronavirus, multiple sclerosis, cancer. There is healing in this house, and it's waiting for you. Just have faith. Just have faith to receive it. God knows. God knows that you need it. There's a blessing in this house, and it's waiting for you. Last verse. There's love in this house. There is love in this house, and it's waiting for you. Some people ask, what's love got to do with it?
There
I love
is
you.
love
I can't tell you.
in this house,
I
and
really
it's waiting for you. Just have faith to receive it.
God knows.
God knows that you need it. There's a blessing in this house, and it's waiting for you.
I invite you to close your eyes and pray with me, if you will. Oh Lord our God, how excellent is thy name. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever thou hast formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. For 1,000 years in thy sight is like yesterday when it is past. God bless the lonely. Bless the coupled people. Bless the people with not enough money. Bless our children. Bless this nation. And then, oh Lord God, bless the world through Jesus Christ, our rock and Redeemer, we pray. My friends, I thank you for being with us today. Brother Michael, can you bring me the envelopes? I walked into church this morning with Willie Ghostin. I want to thank Willie Ghostin. He's helping me to open the church on Sunday mornings. And this is what I saw this morning. I said, praise the Lord. The Lord is blessing this church. And what this means, these are offerings that have come to the church. And I would say that if you have not made your offering to the church, I invite you to do it right now, right from your home. Go grab your checkbook, write out a check, put it in an envelope, mail it to the church. If you can't wait to put your envelope in the mail, go to the Cash App. It's right there on our church website. Go to PayPal. You know, there are a lot of ways you can support the church. And also, I would say, if you belong to a church other than this church, I invite you to think about supporting your church right now. And ask yourself, when I was coming out of my mind, did my pastor support me? When I went to jail, did my pastor come visit me? When I was sick in the hospital or nursing home, did my pastor come visit me? When it was a question of how I was going to bury my mother and my father, did the pastor come to the funeral home, even though there's coronavirus? What has your pastor done for you lately? And I believe your pastor has done a lot, and so support the church. God bless and God keep you. And repeat after me the words of Jesus. Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it shall be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back.